Hey, it's your girl Nancy Red, and this is season 3 of Mompreneurs on MadameNoire, where we celebrate beautiful black entrepreneurs who are also amazing moms. Every Monday, I chat with my guests about their businesses, their families, and their inspiring journeys as they give us incredible advice. Now, I don't often toss the word multi-hyphenate around, but Ambreia Meadows Fernandez is just that. She's a mompreneur multi-hyphenate who is an award-winning storyteller, a yoga instructor, and she's the founder of FreeBlackMotherhood, where she crafts these incredible, vulnerable, and insightful forms of inspiration and lessons for all of us. And it comes in video form, workshop, writing, and so much more. And everything that she does is designed to help mamas and our communities heal and thrive. And we all need a lot of that. Now, full disclosure, I have followed Ambreia for years as a fan, and her work just really makes me feel seen and heard, and I'm very honored to have her here with me today. Welcome! Thank you so much
Hello,
for being
hello.
here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to chat.
I mean, you look, we all struggle, but one thing I'm very candid about is why I became a writer is that I'm always dealing with inferiority complex and perfectionist syndrome and just general overwhelm, and it kind of heightened when I became a mom. And seeing you over the years be so compassionate towards yourself and bold about sharing your journey and from the perspective of like a really caring and thoughtful mother and wife in the midst of lifing. You're able to somehow synthesize these things as like a really artful and intellectual scholar and a really special and feeling a voice. So I'm looking forward to talking about all the things with you. But first, before we get into the work side of things, I always ask everyone who puts the mom in your mompreneur. Tell us about your household.
I have two little humans that I often refer to as Chunk and Chub. Um, Chunk is 5, going to be 6 very soon. She is she's 5 going on like I don't even really know, maybe 38. That seems like a nice not, that just seems the vibe she gives me. Chub or Micken as I call him sometimes, he is 8, about to be 9, and they are both literally the definition of young, gifted, and black. Um I am excited to just witness as they learn to take over the world in their own right, and I know we're in for a long journey because they're already making me put in the work.
I love it. And you have a prankster husband too, right?
Yes, that is that is that is very true. He spends a lot of times doing like silly pranks and jokes, either on me or the kids, and making riddles on the spot. So if you see me making interesting faces, I might be reflecting on one of those jokes that have happened in recent times.
I love it. And you do a lot, and all of it is in the service of your extreme passion for health, in particular reproductive matters, which is at the
Mhm.
forefront of so many conversations today. Your overarching shingle is Free Black Motherhood. So, of course, motherhood came before all of this. And your beautiful writing voice has actually been directly shaped by your birthing experience.
Yes, that is very true. I have always been really passionate about storytelling and writing. I vividly remember buying my first journal. It was in a 2-pack from Sam's when I was, I think, in the 3rd grade. And I've been writing notes ever since then. I will never forget that day. But what has been interesting is after I had my children, I went more from writing my individual experiences to putting in a lot of effort into paying attention to trends and how the things that happen to me are not isolated but are often connected to larger systemic happenings. And so, with my birth experience in particular, I've spoken and written often about how I found out maybe around 36 weeks that my son had hydronephrosis, which is fluid on the kidneys. And when the way my husband and I found out is that I just happened to look at a note that said check in on kidneys and found out they had known for about 3 or 4 weeks and no one had let us know that this concern was happening. And so, because of their delay and frankly lack of respect for my autonomy as a parent, we ended up in this quickly shifting medical environment where we had to drive from Wyoming to Denver for me to seek specialist care to make sure everything would be okay with him long term. And because of that, they made the decision that I should have an induction. And so we had to stay in Denver for a while, waiting for my mom to get up to stay with me while my husband went back and forth for work. And it's funny because, like a lot of times you you have what you lived through and then you can learn what you experienced in retrospect. And so like looking back on the experience, I learned that I thought I had beaten the induction and went into labor naturally, but through reading the paperwork in the last year, I found out that I was actually had a membrane sweep and my labor was induced without my permission. And we also ended up having during that experience, my son, like, they used forceps and I had an unsolicited episiotomy. And then that experience ended, that entire birth journey kind of ended with me having retained placenta and spending about 5 to 6 weeks trying to get someone to listen to me and let them know, like, hey, something is wrong with how I feel in my body. And being turned away by the local emergency room and eventually having to travel about 800 miles at my mom and aunt's adamance to have an emergency surgery and find out that I had, again, that retained placenta. And the entire experience was just incredibly traumatic, and I would not wish it on anyone. And also, now that I've lived longer, I've been a mom for going on 9 years, it also taught me that my traumatic birth experience is reflective of this denial of pain, invalidation, invisibility that is cast on mothers every day, constantly. We just normalize this overwhelm, this stress, this lack of identity. And unfortunately, for many of us, it starts before we even have our first child.
It starts basically from birth.
Yep.
And that's a cycle that you talk about breaking, not one that was done to you purposefully, but when you know better, you do better, right? And you are the epitome of this. You are crafting a narrative for your kids that has not been written, and you are determined to share it with all of us.
Yes, very much so.
So, at what point did this go from you realizing that, okay, you have this passion in you, you found your voice, but this is more than just a hobby. This is what you now call free Black motherhood.
Yes. Oh, that is such a layered question. I believe that the building blocks were being established the whole time, and I didn't realize it. Between those initial days of just experiencing maternal invalidation when I gave birth to my oldest child and starting to write my story was around the same time that narratives around like maternal mortality were coming into place and becoming more visible, specifically as it relates to Black women's 3 to 4 times risk of, dying during birth. And one of the things that I noticed as I shared my story is maternal death. I don't want to say it was sexy in the way that the media approached it. It was definitely sensationalized and making shock value conversations out of our pain and our real lived experiences and risks. And also, it often missed that other piece that when you're in spaces where you're talking about maternal health, you hear mortality, but you also hear morbidity. And we don't focus in as often on that morbidity, that harm, that long life-term consequence of having had a traumatic birth. And so the further I got into the work and the research, and connecting with advocates and learning more about the reproductive justice movement and seeing how a lot of these things have very intentional and layered systemic roots, I found more opportunities to just speak of like, hey, death is happening. And also those of us who are alive are still carrying the pain and basically a death of self, right? This long-term harm and trauma. And so as I began to do that more, had the opportunity to do more writing, be consulted on different health and wellness conversations, both locally in the community and at the national level. And I found myself overwhelmed by narratives that my motherhood should be shaped and anchored in trauma. And that trauma was very accurate. It was present, it was there even in my own story. So there's this Black scholar named Jennifer D. Nash who does a lot of writing very powerful stuff around like narratives of Black motherhood. And so her book, Birthing Black Mothers, she kind of introduces us to this idea that Black motherhood has forever been framed through the lens of crisis. And I remember reading that information and feeling this really intense tension, right? Knowing that I have had many personal experiences of trauma, invalidation, and what I would validly call crisis. And also knowing that by framing Black motherhood in this space, it's important, or while framing Black motherhood in this space, it's equally important to be mindful of how the language of how we describe our experiences sets the expectation and the embodied climate we live in, if that makes sense. And so like reading that, interestingly enough, in my master's in American Studies program, which focused on basically, like, I call it different things at different times, but shortly put, it was focusing on reproduction. And it was really wonderful in learning like narratives of motherhood, narratives of race and gender and how they show up in reproduction, all of these different things. And so I remember sitting with that and knowing that in the work that I've done, highlighting maternal health disparities and sharing my own experiences, I have been involved in furthering that narrative. And not to say that I shouldn't have, but I need to be really intentional about like, what are we offering Black mothers and advocates and all these other sorts of folks who read this content about what it means to grow up what it means to raise children while Black, you know? And so through that experience and during my thesis, I ended up coming across an English legal principle called partis sequitur ventrem, which translates to the status of the child follows the mother. And it is essentially this legal principle that was that turning point in history when slavery became this isolated event to the moment that enslavement was something that you could inherit. It was something that was attached and also like weaponized within the Black womb. And so I spent a lot of time sitting with that and realizing, of course, through months and years of working on this program, that I knew and had witnessed how narratives of struggle and overwhelm have followed Black children and then eventually Black adults and how we define our experience. But it occurred to me that if struggle and overwhelm could follow this narrative, if they could follow us through to enslavement, whether it be literal and systemic bondage, or it be emotional and mental overwhelm and struggle, they could also follow us to freedom. They could, and in order for that to happen, if the child followed the mother, I had to model that, right? I had to be more intentional about how I framed my mothering experience, how I connected with my little humans, how I connected with myself. And once that ball started rolling, it became more visible in the content I was producing. I've always been someone who worked towards solution-focused content, but it became instrumental for me in that moment that if I'm highlighting to you what our barriers are, I need to let you know the change makers at the front lines who are ensuring that we can breathe, even as others don't expect or desire for us to take a breath.
Or they're just not even thinking about it. Like there's like a hierarchy of priorities, and that's why when you look at the three components of your company, Free Black Motherhood, the Black, duh, the motherhood, also duh. The free is a more nebulous concept, and your explanation of it is one of the more novel aspects of your work.
I like to think so. The way that I discuss it verbally on paper is often more precise than my verbal description, because neurodivergence is a whole cocktail of awesome and interesting things. Is I've had a lot of people kind of walk up to me and say, well, what does freedom mean? You know, like what does it look like? How does it feel? All these other types of things. And I tell people, I can't tell you what freedom looks like for you because I don't know your struggles. I don't know your bondage. I don't know your overwhelm. I don't know your background. But what I can say is what is consistent in that element of freedom for me is how do we encourage you to see wherever you are in life. Again, often it prioritizes a Black maternal lens. But, you know, I say Black mothers and others because just like anything in the internet, it's going to touch the people you intended and so many others, right? So
If
thinking of
if
those,
if you like you are effective.
yes, if you are effective. And so like with that in mind, I really let people know that what I always want, regardless of what those identity statuses are for you, is I want you to move through life with reflection and intention and actually pause to just kind of develop a set of awareness around how you're crafting your life. Because right now we have a lot of interest and emphasis in ensuring that our children are treated with more compassion, right? Black children have, and of course, Black adults as well, but Black children in particular have often inherited this space of like being robbed of the vulnerability of childhood. And also, as we support our children through that process, I emphasize like maternal intention and nourishment and all these other types of things because I find two things show up as patterns to me. The first is either we invest that thoughtfulness and intention in our children, but we're willing to harm ourselves to get it done. And the standards we put on ourselves are ridiculously high. And then the alternative perspective is I think we send our children kind of like a subliminal message when we do things that way that yes, our children deserve to be loved and nurtured, but as adults, you're on your own again. You are once again cast into overwhelm and struggle. And so what I say some of the time is I don't want my children to move through life thinking childhood is the only time that they deserve to be loved and cared for. I want them to feel loved and cared for across the lifespan. And in order for them to understand that that is a through line of life, they have to witness me offering myself that care and compassion as I witness them. And we just kind of get into this reciprocal relationship where my children need my intention and grace. And because they've seen me offer that to them, they offer me intention and grace. And we just kind of got a cycle going.
I love
I've said a
that.
lot. I hope I answered the question.
Well, yes, and the thing is, so what it is basically excavating and building a foundation
Yep.
for the whole family because we out
Mm-hmm.
here, this is no world that has been worlded before. We all feel it. And so, look, you and I have completely different backgrounds, right? However, when I see you talk, when I see your writing, when I read you as a total person, I do not know you. Okay, like I met you through some writing experiences, but not as a person, right? And when I'm reading this, it still resonates because while it's a different perspective, the core issues are all still the same. There are fundamental similarities
Mm-hmm.
and issues that we're all dealing with, and none of us have any answers. You just happen to have done a lot of research in these arenas.
Yes, very much. And I was
Like
having a
I haven't
conversation.
done any research. I'm just over here being upset.
Whatever, you've done a lot of research.
No,
False.
but no. I've done a lot of research. If you want to talk to me about bodily fluids, I'm your girl. But if you want to talk to me about generational trauma, I got nothing for you except the stuff that you pour into us. And that's how we all need to have our own niches, and we need to know who to go to. And you are 100% an individual that people who are trying to figure out why do you feel this way? Am I the only one? Okay, you need to go and check out some of Free Black Motherhood's content because that'll make you feel at the very least seen. It might get you a little bit more frustrated because, as you know, the more you uncover, the more overwhelming it can seem at first. But that's the only
Yes.
way. The only way out is through.
Yep. What is it? The only way to it is through it. There's a rhyming version of that too. I can't remember
There's
it right now.
that actually makes it the only way to it is through it. I like
Yeah.
that.
There was I had a conversation with someone recently and the they were talking about how it was a white woman, interestingly enough, a white mother that I met at the event I put on recently that I'll probably chat with you about in a second. And she was telling me that what stood out to her about my content was what I used to think was a weakness or a vulnerability, in that I am sharing parts of my life that I'm not often hearing other people talk about. And I think that often we look at connection and information and knowledge and resources or whatever kind of thing concept we want to put there, and we think everyone needs a hierarchical approach. And it's like, what does the medical expert say about blah? Medical experts are wonderful. Like, multiply certified folks are wonderful. And also, I think that I am learning that there is something really rich about connecting with a peer and having that share moment of like, oh, you're going through this, I'm going through that. How do we see similarities and differences between our experiences, and how do we support each other in this journey? Because I have this core belief that all of us have some level of awareness or knowledge or experience that brings the collective closer to where we're trying to go.
And the piece that's often missing is a lot of this wisdom is not packaged in a palatable manner. It just so happens that you happen to have this as your passion, and you are a professional journalist. You have extended yourself to offer workshops, and you are comfortable being eloquent in front of the camera to create your business. So I think that's the best part about this is, this information is useless in a vacuum. So talk to us
Mm.
about the unvacuum that is Free Black Motherhood. What are the ancillary aspects to this where you get these messages and this information out there?
Yes. So with time, I've come to decide that my writing is actually an auxiliary of Free Black Motherhood. And so often in, national and international places, I am writing stories not only about the experiences of maternal mental health, the reflections of maternal mental health in general, but also Black maternal experiences, being willing to insert myself in a story, which, for some folks is completely unethical in under this myth of objectivity, but that's another conversation for another
Who
time.
who amongst us is ever objective? I digress.
I know. Exactly how I feel. I don't even have to go over it another time because you just summarized it. Thank you. Um, but yes, so inserting my stories, because I've learned that there are a lot of pieces where I feel like a neither nor, they say either or. I feel like I'm neither this nor that. And I feel like I'm often in that space because there are so many areas that I am a hybrid. Um, but so we have the writing element, which is sometimes heavily researched, and other times it's more lived experience based. We have workshops in the community and keynotes. So most recently, I put on a motherhood event where about 20 mothers came together in our local community, and I made sure that they had food and gift bags and just a place to be present and vulnerable as they process what it means to mother in our specific area. And it basically had three goals. The first goal was for us to have a formal space to come together and chat, because in a place where I live, where the average age is probably like 65, that's not something that happens. It's rare for us. The second thing that was really important to me was to make sure that they felt fed, and didn't have to worry about dinner and all these other kind of things. So we made sure that children were invited in the space. We had a babysitter on site. We had food ready. We tried to meet those very intentional concerns. And the third is that we worked to make sure that community resources were being given in that space. And in this case, community resources involved like a presentation from an organization that's national called 211 that can connect us with various services, with questions as much as, can you help me get in contact with someone who can support me with food or income assistance, or can you let me know who can support me through elder care, because I'm sandwiched between taking care of my kids and my parents. And so we had a presentation, a lovely presentation from 211. And the part that I was most excited about is we had what I called kind of like mama sensory gift bags, which had something to address reducing the sensory overwhelm from hearing, touch, taste, movement. So we had a free yoga gift card, gift pass. We had coupons for food. We had this play clay that was for those tactile moments when we needed to be brought back into our body when our children were driving us crazy. um, we also had candles so we can again have that sensory experience to bring us kind of back to ourselves. There were a few different things in there, and that's one of the parts that I was most excited about. So that's more the workshop format. Other times I'm doing keynotes. So earlier this year, I did a keynote speech and workshop at my alma mater where I introduced a group of folks to what is free Black motherhood and how are we disservicing mothers by accepting narratives of struggle and normalizing the loneliness in motherhood. Um, Alongside that, I ended up doing a closing keynote at a motherhood conference that was located out of Boston, where it was more of the academic space. And one of the things that I love about the work that I do is it's this bridge between lay and academic audiences. So one day you might see me having a conversation at an academic conference like that one in a room full of PhDs. The next day you see me chilling with the mamas down the street trying to give them gift bags. I have a lot of hopes and dreams with all of those things. And then the last thing that I'm working on developing is getting more engaged in the community and offering like yoga-based workshops. Because for me, the physical practice of yoga is what is often visible, but it's only one element of an 8-limb path that offers us like philosophies of how to just be more grounded and more content in a world that is always looking to overstimulate us and throw us off. So that was a lot of different things, but those are the
But
pieces.
it also means that it is a sustainable practice because when you have yoga, when you have workshops, when you have speaking, when you have writing, it is an aspect of you that can enable you to sustain. I mean, this is something that you've been working at for many years, and each year, do you find the process getting easier? Do you find people understanding what you're about more, or do you find it's still a bit inflexible in being let into the worlds, the writing worlds, the speaking worlds?
Each year I find that more people see what I'm doing better than I see myself. Each year. So there are plenty of when I describe to people directly what I do and the different ways I do it, I always like to quote Two Chains. They ask me what I do and who I do it for. Like each year, like those things become what more people become aware of those efforts, right? And each year I am still kind of working on accepting that I don't have to be this widely rich, like super recognizable in like TV or something like that, like this super mom, like this imaginary super mom all of us, think of. I don't have to be her, whoever her is, or like someone that people are like, she should be on the Real Housewives of Motherhood change or something, like something like that for the
Well, because the
work
thing
for.
is, let's be real. The what you said, the imaginary mom, that is not useful. I have a whole lot more in common with you than Claire Huxtable. Like
Oh, cool.
that's what this is all about. So when I see you talking to your kids about like actual issues, I'm like, all right, that's that's more like what's happening in this household, and I appreciate it, and I'm not the only one. And you know who else I bet appreciates it is your kids. Like, what do your kids think about your businesses? When they see mom going out there and promoting herself and her intelligence and what she has to offer people, what's their role in all of this?
So my son drew me a
What is this
picture.
right here? What do you have right there? Is that a picture your son drew?
Yes. He
Ah.
drew me a picture about a week ago, okay? And so on the picture, you see he wrote Free Black Motherhood. It's sloppily written because he has bad handwriting like his mom. but because he knows I have like my little shirts that I wear. And so anytime I'm doing something, he's like, "Oh, mom, I met a mom. You should tell her about Free Black Motherhood." And sometimes I'm like, "Salem, I don't know if that white lady wants to hear about Free Black Motherhood." Salem, he doesn't understand those dynamics. Because he sees people of all cultures and colors like supporting this work, you know? And he's very mindful of what we have going on. Like earlier this week, we were at a community organization about some race related um, issues that happened in our community, and I had to have a conversation with them, be like, "Hey, well, mom is going to this community meeting. Do you want to go to Yaya's house or do you want to stay with me? Because if you go with me, we're gonna be having some hard conversations." And they were like, "Well, I think we want to go with mom." And I think what's really exciting to me about this is I don't like, and I know you and all the other moms that are on here can relate to this, is, you have that tension of trying to craft a more beautiful world for your child and also feeling like that beautiful world you're crafting is taking you away from them in certain capacities. Um, and so we have those, like earlier this week, we ended up missing family night because husband has some stuff going on at work. And I was at that community meeting and they were with me and they were like, "Wait a second, Wednesday is family night. Where are my parents? Or why are we not sticking to the schedule?" And he was very clear that he was not a fan of that. And I was on the phone with a friend who just happened to be at the time he was saying it. And I felt awful. And I met him where he was and I affirmed that. But she said something that really stuck out to me, which was, "I need you. I know you are very intentional about like responding to that feedback he gave you. But also, if y'all hadn't been creating this tradition and expectation of connection, he wouldn't be outraged because he wouldn't have experienced it, you know?" And so that really helped. But there's I guess, in one more thing, something that really excites me is there's a picture of me and my oldest at a women's march in 2016, maybe. And so we are there, and I'm holding him on one side, and I have my Sojourner Truth reference, "Ain't I a Woman" sign in the other, trying to acknowledge that um, intersectionality of experience that is so often missed in, gender advocacy spaces. And I have that picture from the newspaper. And then I believe maybe the next women's march that happened, I was one of the speakers. And so it's just really interesting to see that my child has been there through that entire process. He's been there through being in a stroller, a 1 year old with mom holding a sign. He was also right there the year that mama had the turban on because she was growing her locks, and she got a reproductive justice shirt on and is doing the speech to set the space. And I just hope that we continue to work towards ways to be that for him and also not do it at the cost of any of that quality time or as little of that quality time as possible.
But well, like your friend said, that is quality time, right? He gets to see his mom going from attending an event to being in the event to hosting her own events. And all of these are very quality. And I think one thing that I want our audience to know about you, which I find really interesting when I'm watching your content, is you are perhaps one of, I would say, a very tiny handful, I would say a fistful of content creators who ask their children permission before posting or even putting anything, and not just behind the scenes, on a video. You will often say, "Before we get started, do you have your consent to do this?" It has changed how I think about how because my children are in the entertainment industry and large swaths of their life are public. You, unbeknownst to you, have changed how I think about what you refer to as little humans, right? Because they're not our property. We know this, right? And like I've always known this. And I consider myself to be really good with this, but you like heightened it up just a little bit, Even though it takes you out of the zone, you're just scrolling through Instagram. I'm thinking I'm just gonna get one of those little Saturn like life lessons, And you like before you even get beginning, you're just like this is what's happening. Okay, now we'll get into the information. Why is that important to you? And why do you think people need to really think about their children's autonomy when using the internet? And it's part of being free black motherhood. It's part of the noun and the verb of the free.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I love this question. And it's definitely one of those things that folks bring up to me pretty regularly. That asking consent is important for me because, like, generally we live in a world where everything is filmed all the time. And the lines between public and private spheres are so blurred. Sometimes because we want them to be, and other times because we don't. We just live in that tension. But I know, as children in general, as Black people currently, as future Black adults, as current Black children, there are so few places that our children will get to exercise autonomy over their image or their perception, over their words. And so that makes it important. And of course, a lot of that is because we're in a place where there aren't a lot of Black families. And so we have to be very mindful about how easy it is for someone to notice who my husband is, or notice who my children are and where they go to school, or something like that. But it really became this larger thing of, actually, I need you to know, and I need other people to know, that we start these building blocks of informed consent really early in life. And I remember when I was working on my master's, I was learning more about Harriet Washington, and the book she's really well known for is Medical Apartheid, but she has other books as well. And that book changed how I approach many things, because she gave a definition of informed consent as something that happens initially and continues to make sure that you understand what is happening across an experience, right? And so many times we think about that in the medical environment, and it has not been effectively enough practiced and exercised. But in our everyday environments, there are so many opportunities for consent, right? And what a lot of people don't know is, I do record my children giving consent on video, but I also ask them before we record, and I ask them, do I have permission? I talk to them and I say, hey, how are you feeling about this conversation that we just had? To me, it sounds really insightful. Do I have permission to record it and share it? And they'll say yes or no. And of course, you only see the videos where they say yes. But when my kids don't feel like it, they say no.
Oh, and I love that. Well, and I think that comes across. And I laugh because I went through like a phase where I was just asking way too much. And my son was always like, of course. I was like, look, I know. I just really want you to know that I just see you as a person. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I can come across as forceful. See, mm-hmm. the earlier part where you were talking about how we raised and like how we roll. Yeah. And I was like, I just want you to know that you are your own person and you never have to agree to do anything. Even if I sound like, and again, there's different layers to this, right? Like grades, behavior, yada, yada. But if it's like, yo, you want me to post this picture of you to enhance your acting career, if you say no, that's cool, Yep. We're good.
I definitely get it. And I think it's really interesting because right now, and I'm struggling how to make sense of this, but right now I see a lot of folks in the parenthood space, like as influencers, all of these other types of things. But as you said, one thing that I know is rare about mine is I am clearly a page on motherhood. I'm not showing you my child's business. I'm not showing you my child's experiences. And I joke with friends, like, if I wanted to be famous, I could just record my children say the most hilarious they do all the time. It's crazy, but it's not Chunk and Chubb's Instagram, it's my Instagram. And I don't know, it's just a really interesting journey, because right now both of them, especially my oldest, he's asking about creating a YouTube channel and wanting to potentially do like some acting or something like that. And they'd be great for it, but it's forcing me to be like, okay, so with this informed consent, what point do I listen to them saying they want more control over sharing their image, and how do I support that? without
Well, and that's
having
the
these other
beautiful thing.
expectations.
Yeah, no, these are and that's the thing with each year, your Free Black Motherhood evolves because they become medium humans. They're little humans. They're on the
Yep.
way to medium humans. And wait till you get to where I am because they like people.
Whew.
And so you mentioned your page. Tell us where everyone can find Free Black Motherhood
Okay.
and also what they can expect when they're checking out everything. What can they expect to receive and for them to experience?
Okay. So you can find Free Black Motherhood at Free Black Motherhood on Instagram. You can also search Free Black Motherhood on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and I have a podcast there, which is kind of a more in-depth and often more nerdy academic view into motherhood. And so when you're engaging with my content, especially the stuff on Instagram, and there's a website, freeblackmotherhood.com. When you're engaging with that content, you're gonna find me processing the messy and overwhelming parts of life. And so you're going to see clips of articles that might be looking at it from a more expert perspective. You're going to see conversations with the little humans. You're going to see moments of vulnerability and imperfection. And you're really going to see a mom who is trying to hold on to herself and her children simultaneously while holding the dignity of both.
And while also encouraging us to do the same. So thank you for all that. Okay, but before we leave, our time is almost up, but I cannot let you leave without participating in my favorite segment. It's called
Okay.
Mompreneurs Manifestation, and I always ask each of our guests what they really want to make happen, what they're hoping comes of fruition in their business, and how we can help to manifest success in the universe for it.
Ooh, I was not prepared. Um, what I hope
What's the first
for
thing that comes to your mind? Like, what is a bucket list thing that you're
a
hoping for?
bucket list thing.
Just
I would like to be able to do speaking and workshops full time. I really enjoy writing, and I hope to be writing a book in the next couple of years. And in the meantime, I just want more opportunities to connect with mothers, not just in Cheyenne, but nationally, potentially internationally. And I want, I just want to keep making connections and learning new stories. And hopefully one day I'll just be like, oh, I'm just doing workshops all the time and traveling with the little humans instead of trying to juggle so many plates at once to make it work.
that is the dream. And you know how I feel about books. You could get started on a book today. So, like, I'm glad that is on your bucket list because that is an entirely doable one for you because you're a great example. Perfection is the enemy of good. Just get on out there and write your book, girl.
I do. I need
You're
to.
very talented, and I think that you have a lot to say. Really quickly, if someone wants to hire you for a workshop, what are the topics? What are the topics of your keynotes and of your workshop?
Yes. So the topics are very flexible. So health, equity, and wellness are very common passions of mine. Talking about how historical narratives of bondage and enslavement impact modern motherhood is another area. Reproductive justice, anything on that spectrum, is an area. Learning how to grow your own business as a writer, another area. Basically, if you've seen me do it or write about it, I can talk about it and give you a workshop about it.
I heard rave reviews about you at the Mom Friends. So, okay, thank you so much for joining us. You are a delight, and everyone, now you know exactly where you can find Free Black Motherhood. I did not know about your podcast. I was like making sure my type A started getting itchy, so I made sure to scroll through. You did not mention it in your bio. You didn't like so the podcast I think is actually a wonderful resource because the more you can hear Ambreia speak, the better you are off. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank all of you for listening to and watching Mompreneurs. As a reminder, a brand new episode goes live each Monday on Urban One Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit urban1podcast.com to learn more. That's urban1podcast.com. Mompreneurs is brought to you by the Urban One Podcast Network and MadameNoire. Created, produced, and hosted by me, Nancy Red. Executive produced by Allison McGovna and Tanya Hoffler-Moore. Produced and edited by Jiminique Miller.